my PhD with Dr. Evolutionary at the College of Evolutionary. So we're going to talk about evolutionary transition towards eusociality in stepping shrimps. So first of all, advanced sociality is a major evolutionary innovation. It allows social insects to dominate the habitat, and also in some way our own species to conquer the earth. Eusociality especially has been interest for evolutionary biologists for a long time. You are likely all familiar with eusocial ants, bees, and termites, and possibly the two eusocial mammal species. So all of these eusocial animals they form big colonies and share common characteristics, including overlapping generations, cooperative care of young, and reproductive division of labor. And this is the later term that I want to focus here. Reproductive division of labor can be quantified by what's called reproductive skill index, which describes the inequality of reproduction among colony members. So for example, in ants, they've got several thousand workers, but only a single queen. So they have a very high index of reproductive skill. But this index is also applicable to other social animals. For example, cooperatively breeding birds and mammals, they will have lower index of skill because there's, for example, we have one breeder and just a handful of helpers. So you see that this different social organization falls along this continuum of reproductive skill. And it has been suggested that we can use reproductive skill as a common denominator to understand the evolutionary driver and consequences of social evolution. But doing so actually makes a subtle assumption that reproductive skill indeed evolve continuously, meaning that species with no skill evolve in a species with lower skill and eventually a species of high skill. Is this really true? Did social organization evolve along just a single axis, or perhaps evolve in some other fashion? So the exploration of how eusociality evolved has mainly been done on animals on land, in social insects, for example. But the discovery of eusociality in spawn-dwelling stepping shrimps in the genus Synelphus opens up new door to test how eusociality evolved in the ocean, and also in a separate, very different lineage. Eusocial shrimps form large colonies of up to several hundred individuals. The queen is only reproductive individual, and you can identify her very easily from the colony because she carries eggs under her abdomen. These eggs hatch into non-dispersing crawling larvae that stay in the natal nest. And likely because of that, all these workers or colony members, they are highly related. These workers cooperate to defend the nest, and they have the behavioral and morphological differentiation. With this powerful snapping claw, they will even perform this synchronized snap to deter intruders. And most intruders that enter the colony eventually got killed. So the genus Synelphus is also very good for comparative analysis. There's a published molecular phylogeny is already available. Most species in the Caribbean form this monophyletic clay with about 45 species. And all of these species in the monophyletic clay, they are spawn dwellers, meaning that they spend most of their lifetime living inside spawn canals. So they have very similar ecology, but different social organizations. Some of them are pair-forming species, which is the social organization for most stepping shrimps. So that's the ancestral state. But some of them are communal, which is more like communal wasps and bees. They form by multiple, probably non-related pairs living together with roughly equal separation. And of course, some of them are eusocial, with a queen and a bunch of non-reproductive workers. So as shown here is a queen and two workers from different cohorts of different sizes. So eusociality in this monophyletic group has evolved at least 4 times, and likely a few more times outside of the Caribbean. So what's important is that these different social organizations also appear to fall along this continuum of eusocial skill, of reproductive skill. Pair-forming species will have low skill, communal species having lower skill, and eusocial species have high skill. So my objective here is to explore the evolutionary transition between these different social organizations in shrimp. To answer 2 related questions, is there a continuum of social organization in shrimp? And is communal species and intermediates towards eusocial species? So first of all, these different social organizations are demographically different. And depending on the variable you look at, some might suggest that they form a continuum, but some might not. So for example, in colony size on the right, you see that colony size increased from pair forming to communal to eusocial. But if we look at the number of ovigerous or reproducing females, it doesn't form such a continuum. So another way to look at that is to map this social organization on shrimp phylogeny. So this is a published based on 3 genes and morphological data. So this phylogeny falls in 4 major clade, and the first 2, you can see from the first 2 clade, eusocial species in red evolved within a clade. This clade of mostly pair-forming species. But if you look at the bottom clade, you see that communal species are found within the larger clade of pair-forming species. And this middle clade is more complex. You see eusociality and communal species evolve several times, but in none of this case we see eusocial species within the larger clade of communal species. So to more rigorously test this, explore this evolutionary transition, I look at 3 trait evolution models. Model 1 is what we call a continuum, which is pair-forming species evolving in the communal and eventually eusocial species. Model 2 says that communal and eusocial species evolve separately. So as you might have predicted by looking at the phylogenetic tree, model 2 is the best supported model. And it's consistently supported with different underlying evolutionary processes. Which this model means that eusocial synavial species evolved from pair-forming species. Communal species also evolved from pair-forming species, but via separate trajectory. And this suggests that communal and eusocial species might be 2 different evolutionary endpoints. And this actually agrees with what's found in Hymenoptera. And it has been proposed that communal and eusocial species are alternative social strategies to cope with ecological pressure. So I want to explore this a little bit to ask whether communal and eusocial species have different ecological advantage in terms of larger group size. Perhaps there's some benefits of having a larger group in the ecology. So we look at some ecological data that Emma Delphine collected for over 20 years. Now it's moved on to the Smithsonian. So we look at 3 ecological variables. So first is the number of sponge host species each shrimp species use. The sponge occupancy, which is how many, the proportion of individual sponge occupy, and also the geographical range. So first of all, when pair-forming species transition into eusocial species, we see that they use more number of host sponge species, and also they use more of those sponge species. But when pair-forming species transition to communal species, we don't see such advantages. But communal species actually have wider geographical range. So what it means that eusocial and communal species, they all have some form of ecological advantage, but those manifest differently. So in conclusion, we found out that shrimp sociality, there's a single social continuum. And this communal and eusocial species represent alternative social strategies that evolve via separate trajectories. And they also show different aspects of ecological advantages. So finally, to look a little more broadly about eusociality in shrimps and in the ocean, what we find in shrimps actually match with so-called subsocial evolution of eusociality in insects, which means we suggest that eusociality first initiated by parent-option association instead of by accumulation of non-related individuals. So communal species are not intermediates that show eusociality in the ocean and on land. So what it all means maybe that the transition towards different social organizations, they happen in the same way, although shrimp and insect are in different ecosystem. So Maybe you will say, well, shrimp is just the same as social insect, and there's nothing new we can learn from that. Well, actually, there might be something different in terms of the genomic architecture. So we did some exploration with genome size in shrimp. It turns out they vary quite a bit from 5 picograms to 20, so there's 4 times differences. And eusocial species tend to have higher genome size, which is exactly the opposite pattern as observed in insects. So we want to explore further what's the underlying difference in there, and I'm going to start a postdoc this fall at Dustin Rubenstein's lab in Columbia, so stay tuned for more story about stepping shrimp in the near future. Thank you for you and all the people that have helped